We're now going to take a look at some of the key changes in ISO 9001-2015 and IATF 16949-2016 affecting the internal audit process within an organisation. My name is Paul Hardiman, Director of Quality Partner. I've been working with quality management systems for 25 years and I'm an IATF witness auditor and trainer. So now let's take a look at the changes in the internal audit process using the turtle diagram. Let's start with the input. So it's important that when we look at the internal audit process that we understand customer specific requirements. Customers may have specific requirements about auditor qualification, about the frequency of audits, the types of audits, and the standards that we use for the audit. So we have to understand customer specific requirements. In the internal audit process, we need to understand what process risks and opportunities have been identified within each of the quality management system processes, because this may affect the frequency that we undertake the internal audits. We need to understand internal and external performance trends, non-conformities and customer complaints, because again that could affect the internal audit frequency that we undertake. We have to understand criticality analysis. Which processes maybe are more critical than others, because that could affect the frequency of audits. And we have to understand, have we made any changes to process that might mean that the risks in the process have changed and we need to audit to make sure the risks in the process are being effectively managed. So these are some of the inputs that we need into the internal audit process. What are some of the outputs? Well, first of all, we need an effectively implemented internal audit program, including we need to do annual system audits over a program of 3 years. So we don't have to cover each quality management system process every year. And this is a significant clarification when we compare it to ISO TS 16949, that we can audit our quality management system processes over a 3-year period, but taking into account risk. If we have a process with higher risk, we're going to be auditing that process at a higher frequency. Manufacturing process audits. Again, we need to make sure that we're covering all manufacturing processes over a 3-year cycle. So for example, if we have the processes of welding, bending, riveting, painting, we need to make sure that we're auditing all of those processes over a 3-year cycle. Again, the frequency of the audit is going to be based upon risk. We also, in manufacturing process, need to take into account shifts. So we need to audit processes across the different shifts that we operate. Finally, product audit. We need a product audit program in accordance with customer specific requirements. So as an example, if we are supplying a German vehicle maker, they will say make reference to VDA 6.5 to develop our product audit program. So we do need to understand customer specific requirements, but unlike system and process audit, there's no requirement about the frequency that we audit each of the products, but we do have to have a product audit program. So these are some of the things that we will develop as an output of the internal audit process. So now let's take a look at the internal audit process and the how. So firstly, whereas ISO TS 16949 said we had to have a documented procedure for internal audits, what we now see is that we need a documented internal audit process. So that isn't a fundamental difference, but maybe we can take a fresh look at internal audits utilising the process approach. And we can think about the internal audit as a process. We need to make sure that we audit effectively the software development capability process. So if we are developing software, that we have got a qualified auditor that is competent to go and audit that software development capability process, and we're using any software development capability checklist, for example, that may be specified by the customer. There is a scheme called Automotive Spice that is relevant to software development. So maybe the customer says that we have to make reference to that Automotive Spice process. We need to make reference to the relevant quality management system documentation, including the FMEA and the control plan. So when we're undertaking particularly process audits, just as for the third-party audit process, the auditors need to be very competent in the development of FMEA and control plan, so they understand the structure and the content, but equally, when they're doing their manufacturing process audit, they need to make sure the controls defined in the FMEA and the control plan link together and are effectively implemented within the manufacturing process. So particular emphasis about use of the FMEA and control plan in our manufacturing process audits, and to some degree also we can use a control plan when we're doing our product audits. So now let's take a look at with who, and primarily in here for the internal audit process we're looking at the competency of the people that are going to undertake system audits, process audits and product audits. And we need to make sure that people are competent in the automotive process approach. Well, maybe auditors already have that competency, which is great. The new IATF is still based upon the process approach. But we also need to make sure that auditors are competent in the concept of risk-based thinking. So that may be an area that we need to develop the auditor competency. We need to make sure that auditors are competent in the structure and the content of customer-specific requirements. We need to make sure that auditors are competent in the current standards. So we need to make sure auditors have competency in 9001-2015 and they have competency in IATF 16949-2016. And also they have competency in the relevant automotive core tools applicable to the scope of the audit they're going to undertake. So that may be, for example, APQP, FMEA, control plan, MSA, SPC or PPAP. How can we audit those if we don't understand them? So auditors should have the relevant competency in the applicable core tools. And finally, most auditors, if they're existing, should already have the competency in basic auditing techniques, which will involve how to plan an audit, how to undertake an audit, how to report an audit, and how to follow up and close out findings of an audit. So that shouldn't change that much, but we need to make sure that risk-based thinking is incorporated into the auditor methodology. When they're going out to audit, they are taking into account the risks within the process that they're auditing. So now let's take a look at the summary of the changes that affect the internal audit process. Firstly, we need an audit program covering all quality management system processes and manufacturing processes over a 3-year cycle. So obviously the frequency of audit is going to depend upon risk and the performance of the individual processes. But at minimum, we need to cover all of the quality management system processes and all of the manufacturing processes across all shifts over a 3-year cycle. Secondly, there's much more clearly defined requirements about internal auditor competency. We've seen that we need to make sure that internal auditors understand, for example, the concept of risk-based thinking, they understand customer-specific requirements, they understand the updated standards. This does not mean that we have to start training auditors from scratch. Maybe what we need to think about is giving our internal auditors some short upgrade training that really brings out the changes between the old standards and the new. The third point is there's far more emphasis on the review and update of the audit program based upon changes in risks, changes in organisation structure, for example, and changes in process performance. So we shouldn't ever really see, unless the organisation is perfect, a static annual audit program. The audit program will change depending on the way that the organisation is performing and the way that the process is performing to meet the customer or the organisation requirements. And finally, there's far more emphasis on customer-specific requirements, making sure that when we're doing our internal audits, we're incorporating the customer-specific requirements into our internal audit process. We're not doing a 100% compliance check, but we're sampling customer-specific requirements to make sure that the process to identify and implement them is working effectively. So in summary, overall, the internal audit process has not significantly changed, but I think there have been some significant clarifications, particularly regarding the audit programme and specifically regarding the competency of internal auditors.